what other strategies can we use to study for comprehensive exams? Okay, so when we do this, there's a couple of things that we want to touch on. Because remember, this is a goal that we have of getting as good a grade as possible. We want to ace that. We want to get an A. We want that grade to raise our class grade if we're not running at an A already. And we don't want that grade to diminish what we're doing. But the first thing is we're going to make a plan. So you got to figure out when you're going to start the studying process. You've got to figure out what kind of methods that you're going to use. And I think the most important thing is setting a deadline. And don't make the deadline the day of the final. Make it a week before the final. So that you're not, the week of the final, your brain is going to be full of all this stuff with all of these other classes that you're having to deal with. So when you get to the point of doing the final exam, you've got all of that stress on your mind. You want to be prepared ahead of time, before that week. And we're running out of time. We've got about 4 or 5 weeks left to do this. So make that plan first. The second thing is make sure that you have all your resources. So make sure you have all your knowledge bases back. Make sure that you've corrected the ones that are the questions that are wrong. Make sure that you have the textbook and get all the handouts and everything. If you don't have them, make sure that you go on Moodle and get them because you're going to want to refer back to them. Take your notes, your summaries, your note cards, all of that stuff. Make sure that that's all available, and make sure if you have a study team, try to figure out when you're going to meet and do that. You know, don't just say we're going to get together for 30 minutes, go through this couple questions, and then go eat Tony's Pizza, because it's going to be more than that. You're going to need a number of different sessions. Then, once you have all of that stuff, you need to narrow down the material. So you can go and study every single question on every single knowledge base, and that takes a lot of time. But what I would say is remember what was on the previous tests. Now, you don't have a copy of the test, but as you look through the knowledge bases, then some of those should be more familiar. You should remember being tested on them. So if they were on a previous test, then they're probably going to show up, or they could potentially show up on the final. What topics did you have trouble with? So if there were calculations or things that you really didn't do well on when you took the test the first time, make sure that you focus on those, okay? Because there's some information that you learned and you did very well on the test and it's still in your brain, it's still fresh, but there's some other things that are not. So what do you have trouble with? What skills? And those are things like calculations and having to do some of the math involved. And I think the math skills are the ones that people are having the biggest trouble with. Focus on the knowledge base questions, because that's where the test questions came from, and those test questions are where the final is going to come from. Okay, so we did this because we wanted to make sure that students had all the resources and had all the information for the greatest chance of success. So then it rests on your shoulders to do your part and study that and get that back into your brain so that it's up there permanently. So you want to look at the kind of skills that you have had to practice and go through that. Especially, what have you forgotten since the tests? One of the problems that students have is they'll cram all that information in their brain ready for the test, and then they think once they take the test, they can just erase that part of their memory and fill it up with Britney Spears lyrics or whatever, and you think, okay, I don't need it again. But that's not the purpose of why we're here. We're trying to build this foundation. We have to have these skills and be able to recall them when we're working. That's very important. So what have you forgotten since the last test? Make sure that goes back into your brain. And here's the final bit of pieces of what I would suggest First of all, I think people underestimate the amount of time that it takes. Some people get stuff really fast. So it takes them a very minimal amount of time to study. They take a test, they do well, and then that's kind of their life because they pick up information real quickly. Other students, it takes 2 or 3 times longer. It's harder for them. So you know your studying habits, you know your abilities to recall information. You've had a lot of practice by now. So make sure that you give enough time. And balance the study time between classes. So if you're taking multiple classes, if you spend all your time studying for one final, then you'll probably do well on that final, but what cost does that have to other classes? It's better to study a little bit of everything than to get stuck with a couple of the little pieces and not have enough time to go through all of the things. And then one of the most challenging things about taking a test is a lot of people have test anxiety. They get nervous, they get frustrated, they have a difficult time when they're sitting down trying to recall that information. And you may be one of those people. What helps those people more than anything else is by being prepared. So if you're going into the test and you're feeling confident in what you know, then that's a great thing, because you'll feel the pressure, you'll feel the stress while you're taking the test, but you've got it. It's there. It was there before you sat down at this seat to take that test. So now we've got to work through the anxiety to get that information back out and onto the test.